Excellent. I think we're recording now. Can you see that? Does that show up?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. Thanks very much. So, like I was saying, the basis for this course is the principle that is the fact that after this course, we expect that you become more reflective, more nuanced when you're making decisions, and that even though you may not be the CEO of your public institution or your private firm, but there are ways that you can make inputs into policy positions in their execution, that makes it fairer, right? Makes it more, makes it much more, makes the service you're providing more accessible to the general public. It's more inclusive, it's more humane in its approach, and it's more collaborative in the way it is delivered. Okay, so these are some of the ways that the thoughts are binding this. We're also, in the line of thoughts, also want to talk about corruption and the challenges it poses, right? And we'll see how ethics also, kind of has an input into that as well. So you remember that we had kind of debated this earlier on in the class. We talked about what is ethics, and of course, they're not the same as feelings, not the same as religion. We talked about that most of us growing up, the first layer of filters that we absorb growing up are really from religion, and they're developed through religion. For example, religious teachings, religious exposures, and all of that. And that they can help us develop the first basics of our ethical principles, but we must also be able to look beyond our religious ethics, since not everyone is an adherent to our own religious practice. We must be able to expand beyond that and accommodate other views as well. We should also recognize that religious traditions can also develop, some of the best known ethical standards we have, which is the golden rule, right? Anybody know what the golden rule is? Hello, class. You know that we are very interactive.
Let's do unto others. I guess
Hello.
do unto others what you want to be done unto you, I guess.
Excellent. That is the golden rule. So it's one of the highest forms of ethical lenses that we have, where we are often asked to ask ourselves, this action that I want to take, this effort I want to undertake, if someone was doing the same in my direction, would I want them to take the same action with regards to me, right? Ethics is also not the same as following the law, because often in repressive regimes, we found that they can use the law to institute a kind of they can use the law as a tool of repression. For example, we've seen it in in South Africa. It's been the law was used in South Africa during the program against Black people. It was used also in the United States. Essentially, laws that recognized Black people as property and not as individuals who had their own rights. And even till now, there's still some laws. I mean, even up till last year, I remember there was a discriminatory law in one of the states in the United States against the ethnic Indians, you know, that kind of precluded them, or it precluded them from being able to operate or own a brewery, you know. In fact, it's something that still, you know, they're still making efforts to repeal. And, you know, that law was instituted because some gentlemen thought that, you know, the ethnic Indians were more likely to be drunks without any without any scientific evidence. They just thought that ethnic Indians were drunks and you know, were profligates, and that they should be, you know, curtailed, that action should be curtailed so that they can be productive members of the society. That's the way the law was. The law is a very robust document, but I mean, in summary, that's what it meant. It said. So it banned them from being able to own distilleries, banned them from being able to sell alcohol products, you know. So for several years, you had other Americans being able to come to, I think it was the Cherokee Indians, I do not recall, but they had pristine water sources and some farmland that kind of yielded very good grains for alcohol. And you had other Americans come in, exploit those resources, and sometimes even mess up the pristine nature of their natural resources for gain, while the laws that were made in, you know, ancient times still prevented these ethnic Indians from being able to access their own resources. So up till last year, I recall that there was an effort, especially by a group of craft beer makers in the US of ethnic origin, to repeal that law. You know, it's similar to what, you know, you could find in South Africa too at some point, until you know, a lot of repealing was done. Oh, sorry, excuse me a minute. So, you know, until a bit of some of those laws were repealed, but you can still find some instances in South Africa where, you know, there's still some discriminatory practice that's still held as, for example, let's look at this. This is almost unintentioned, but I mean, it's the same result. Recently there was discussion about some memorial land for some South Africans that died during a mass, you know, they were protesting and they were shot to death. They were shot and killed by by landed Boers of South Africa. And it happened that some of that that portion where the protest and some of those South Africans lived, ethnic South Africans lived at the time, were identified and made a kind of what's it called? A kind of a place where people could go as a kind of they erected some sort of structures as a remembrance on that land, So that location should be accessible to everyone, right? This place has been made a place of where you could remember, where you could come in, read about the history, read about what has happened in the past, why this happened, the kind of injustices that transpired, and so it's a place of cultural significance to all South Africans. It's also not just a place of remembrance, but there are people with families, right, that died in that riot, that died in that process, and were buried on that patch of land. Unfortunately, that patch of land sits on the ranch of a 5th generation Boer. And he insists that everyone who comes on the property must pay some money to access that location. Sometimes he also bars people from going to that location because he says that maybe the place is currently not in the right. It's not being maybe attended to by the local authorities. They've not weeded the area. So he says it constitutes a danger to human movement. So it's currently fencing off the place and that nobody should visit. Right? Now, property law says that he has a right to prevent, he reserves the right of access to his property, meaning that he can prevent people from entering the property. And if anyone enters by force, he also has a right to defend himself, meaning he can pull a gun on them. Right? Now, the law that provides for property rights is correct. But in this case, the application of that law is unjust. Are we following? Are we following?
Yes, sir.
Where with you, sir?
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Because these are arguments, right? So I need to be able to feel your pulse as I'm talking. Right. So these are unjust applications of that law. And the only way is for probably the district or the local government in that area to probably purchase or condone off that portion of land and provide public access to that remembrance. But as at last year, when the issue was coming up between some political actors and the landed Boer, there was no resolution in sight. In fact, he had gotten some court injunctions, allowing him to use force to restrain people from accessing the sites based on his property rights. I hope we understand. So the law can be unjust. So ethics is not the same thing as following the law. It's also not the same as following culturally accepted norms. We've talked about this in the past. Ethics is also not science. Like we mentioned in the past, science may sometimes it may just dwell on evidence, but sometimes we must also pursue evidence with the nuance of cultural appropriateness. Okay? Very important. Now, let's go to the 6 ethical lenses and how to apply them. First is the rights lens. What are human rights? Some suggest that the ethical action is the one that best protects and respects the moral rights of those affected. This approach starts from the belief that humans have a dignity based on their human nature per se, or on their ability to choose freely what they do with their lives. Anyone in healthcare will recognize this portion as the binding principle of St. Kizito Health. Does anyone here know about St. Kizito? The free healthcare service that's usually provided in rural areas and some disadvantaged areas. Anybody ever heard of St. Kizito? Those in healthcare should have heard about St. Kizito, or maybe you can check that up later.
I thought it was a Catholic thing.
Exactly,
like a
it's a
Catholic
Catholic
mission
thing.
fund or something.
You're right. It was started by a Catholic group, but the aim really, or their founding belief is that all humans have intrinsic value, right? And because of that, they provide care in an aesthetically pleasing way to the most disadvantaged people on earth. So you find them in places where people cannot pay for healthcare. You find them in rural areas. You find them in disadvantaged areas. Even though, the iteration in Nigeria has been a bit more nuanced. So you find them, I think in Nigeria, they're more, they're practicing more in Lagos.
They're in Lekki, they're in Ikorodu, they're in Taraba.
Excellent.
Jakonde, please.
Good. So they're a bit more nuanced in the way they practice in Nigeria, but essentially their rallying cry is every human has intrinsic value and should be treated as such, right? So now, on the basis of this dignity, they have a right to be treated as an end in themselves, not merely as a means to other ends, right? So the list of moral rights, including the right to make their own choices about what kind of life to lead, to be told the truth, not to be injured, to be given a degree of privacy and so on, even though widely debated, must be accorded to them, right? Rights are also often understood as implying duties. In particular, the duty to respect other people's rights and dignity and defend it when required. Okay, so that's the first lens we look at. And when we're talking about lens, we're talking about equipping yourself with the ability to look at other people's rights when you're making government policies or when you're implementing. There are 2 ways to it. You're either implementing or you are formulating, right? So when you're formulating the policy, are you looking at the rights of people or are you looking at the rights when you're implementing? I believe I told this story about access to contraceptives at the beginning of this session, where we talked about how the family plan blueprint in Nigeria is very generous and removes hurdles to access, but the challenge has been providers and some states that have put up brick walls, that have been removed by the federal government initially. So, sometimes policymakers, sometimes out of, ignorance, they erect a wall, they erect a hurdle. Sometimes for example, the one in Lagos, the thinking around it was that they wanted to prevent abuse of children. That was why they instituted an age hurdle, which was 18. But when they were presented with the facts around age at which young people are initiating sexual intercourse, age at which male and females are beginning to get pregnant within the states, right? They also got to understand that these data were not presented to them when they were making those initial rules around access to family planning. It didn't mean they changed it though. They didn't change it even after being confronted with those details. They didn't change it, right? So initially they could speak about the challenge around ignorance, but then subsequently it was just them defending what they had done, right? So that's one. Like looking at the rights of the individuals, I think that they would have been better served if they had more information when they were formulating the regulation, and they would probably have retained it the same way the federal government had removed those hurdles. So that's the rights lens. Then the justice lens. And very importantly, we'll talk about social justice a little bit later. Now, justice is the idea that each person should be given their due. And what people are due is often interpreted as fair or equal treatment. Nobody, for example, should be imprisoned without access to justice. You can't keep a prisoner without access to the courts. But we find that a lot of time, political prisoners, or sometimes even just people in the system, higher ups sometimes use the law or law officers to impinge on the rights of others. What is due to them is fair or equal treatment, which means that whatever is stated in the Constitution about access to justice should be provided for them. Another aspect of looking at this justice, is how do we structure our basic institutions? Our healthcare institutions, are they set up in a way that they are biased against a certain group of people? For example, if it's in terms of policy, do we, for example, institute healthcare access and say anybody, for example, okay, let me refrain from using that example because it's a very, there are healthcare examples that are a bit complex, but I want to use something very simple. If, for example, you say primary healthcare is free, but you only have access to primary healthcare if you come and you present your BVN card, not your BVN number, BVN card. For Nigerians, what percentage of people do you think have their BVN cards? Very few. As soon as most people get their BVN numbers, they don't care about getting the card. They just move. The same thing with the NIN identification card. As soon as people register and get the number, a lot of people don't go back to pick up the NIMC cards. They don't. So if you, for example, place that you unintentionally, or you will directly, if you actually know the number of people with access to those cards, you either unintentionally or ignorantly or intentionally use it to disenfranchise people. And that won't be justice, because you've used a hurdle to reduce access to that service that should be free for all. That's known as distributive justice. That's giving benefits and burdens equally, right? There's also corrective justice, where you try to repair past injustices. For example, and a good example of that will be ethical preferential treatment. And ethical preferential treatment comes up in many ways. You can talk about things like affirmative action. You can talk about things like federal character in Nigeria, right? All of these are preferential treatment given to people who have been injured in the past in order to repair and bring them up, give them a helping hand, to get them past some of the hurdles that those past injuries have made. Another example is, for example, reparation in the Northeast, occasioned by those monies that are being funneled to the Northeast to repair infrastructure, build new housing estates. For example, in Borno State, in Bama, there have been new housing estates that have been established there to resettle people, right? Those people that will be resettled there are Nigerians like us, right? They are in only a small area of the country, but the entire country will be saddled with the equal burden to pay back those loans, those development loans, right? And it is only right because a section of the country has been affected and we all give them a helping hand, kind of reparative, okay, and ensure that, they are resettled and they become proper productive parts of the whole, right? There's also retributive justice, that's determining how to punish wrongdoers. For example, so we talked in the last class we had about someone who, carried out and sort of tried to injure their neighbor. One was successful, the other one was not. The one that was not successful should be punished, but probably not as heavily as the one that successfully injured their neighbor, right? So whatever punishment is allotted to them is called retributive justice, but it is just because to the level or to the extent of injury that they have caused on their neighbor, they are punished to that extent. So one is corrective. It doesn't take the life of that person. It says, don't do it again. Don't act in this manner. So it is corrective. While the other one is essentially retributive, saying this has been done, this is a retribution, a life for a life, and other such things that we say. There's also restorative or transformational justice that restores relationships or transforms social structures as an alternative to criminal punishment. An example of that is the restoration that happened in Rwanda. All of us, at least most adults, in Africa, watch with bated breath to see how, all those reparations were going to be done, how people were going to be, made to work together, after such a horrendous, circumstance. But we also have, the communities came together, spoke, talked to each other's face, how, friends and family talked about how they were hurt by each other's actions, the injury they inflicted on each other, and how much they kept speaking until everyone had spoken out all their minds. It's a way of restoring community. It doesn't mean that all tensions disappear, but it means that we keep at it. We keep at it until all of that disappears. And you should note that this does not happen without effective ethical leadership. Because while this communication is going on, the ethical leader moderates that conversation. It doesn't stop you from saying, this is the person that hurt me. He's seated here. This is what he did. No, it doesn't stop you from doing that. But it stops you from using tropes. Those banal words that were used to engender the pogrom in the first place. It stops you from using or whipping up those sentiments, but it allows you to really, really bear your mind. Effective leadership is ethical. And that's why we believe that to develop our countries, if we speak or we engender these qualities in all of us as public and private sector leaders, that we will begin to find a community that rises up to the challenge that it's facing. That's a justice lens. The utilitarian lens. Some ethicists begin by asking, how will this action impact everyone affected? Emphasizing the consequences of our actions. For example, when you're doing for ethical corporate action, it's not the one that produces the greatest good and does the least harm for ethical corporate action. You are the one that produces the greatest good and does the least harm for all that are involved: your customers, your employees, your shareholders, community, and environment. And there's a way, this one actually takes some mathematical calculation, cost-benefit analysis, but we're not going to go into the cost-benefit analysis. I know it's something that we do a lot of when you come in for a master's in clinical pharmacy. We kind of we go the whole gamut on this, right? Where we help you see cost-benefit analysis, where you're looking at benefits in terms of quality-adjusted life years. You're looking at in terms of how many years this person will gain in addition to that's how many years they will survive beyond someone who has not been treated. Then you go beyond that to say, what will be the quality of life, right? For example, will they be extreme? Will they rely on hospital care for that remaining period of life, which is not as qualitative as we would expect? Then we look at, okay, what will be the quality of life that we need to aim for to justify this kind of cost, right? So all of that is done at that level, so we won't go into that at this point, right? But it's also an approach that is used when we're looking through the utilitarian lens. And it's important because budgets are finite. So cost-benefit analysis are important tools to ensure that budgets meet a utilitarian need. There's a common good lens. And according to this approach, our lives as a society is a good in itself that we aim to achieve. And our actions must contribute in building that outcome, right? This approach suggests that the interlocking relationships of society are the basis of ethical reasoning, and that respect and compassion for everyone are requirements of such reasoning. So when you're thinking with the lens of the common good, you're looking at our social relationship and how doing good must take cognizance of that social relationship as well. Then the virtue lens. It's a very ancient approach, very similar to what we look at as religious, with our religious lenses. It argues that ethical decisions should be consistent with certain ideal virtues that provide for the full development of our humanity. These virtues are dispositions and habits that enable us to act according to the highest potential of our character and on behalf of values like truth and beauty, honesty, courage, compassion, generosity, tolerance. All of these are examples of virtue. So virtue ethics means when you're putting on the virtue ethics lens, you'll be asking yourself, what kind of person will I become if I do this? Or is this action consistent with my acting at my best? The care ethics lens, I think that's the last one. Right? The care ethics lens is rooted in relationships and in the need to listen and respond to individuals in their specific circumstances. You see that we've come from a broad lens to a more specific lens right? All true. So first, we're looking at the broader systems and the community systems in how the world is arranged, the rights, right? So we're looking at the broader systems, and then we keep going down the gears until we reach the minutest speck, which identifies the individual rooted in relationships, right? They're rooted in they respond to individuals in their specific circumstances rather than merely following rules or calculating utility. Okay, holds that options for resolutions must account for relationships, concerns, and feelings of all the stakeholders involved. You must focus on connecting intimate interpersonal duties to society duties, and ethics of care might counsel, for example, a more holistic approach to public health policy that considers things like, for example, when we had the lockdown, right? If you remember, people in Nigeria, I'm sorry I keep referring to Nigeria, but you know, that's a closest example that I can point to. And because there's always news about Nigeria, you know, everywhere. So it seems like most of us are a bit familiar with Nigeria, but as much as possible, I'll keep using other examples to make it, to drive home the points with every one of us, right? In Nigeria, for example, during the COVID-19 pandemic, during the lockdown phase, right, we had major problems in Lagos State. In fact, there was a first few days, I think about first week or so, where security was non-existent. For example, there was 1 million boys that were breaking into homes in major communities. In fact, for a large section of residential homes, people could not sleep overnight. They had to, you know, institute something called a neighborhood watch, because these people did not have food. There were other areas where people put foods together and put them outside, so that when those boys came, they just scattered away those foods and left them in peace. We also found situations where, you know, a number of religious institutions also intervened, because the state government, you know, they did their own, they rolled out palliatives, they gave out food and you know, free food, grains, bread, and a couple of other things. But in the nature of our unethical leaders, a number of them, you know, they stored those grains, they stored those food items away and did not distribute them. For example, there were examples of families who were provided maybe just one loaf of bread and, you know, a few cups of beans, maybe another few cups of rice, you know, and some of them complained bitterly that this is what I got, you know, it's not even enough for my family for a week, right? And then there were other situations where religious institutions also stepped in, private individuals also went beyond their mark to bring out, you know, resources and feed some people as they could. So care ethics says, when you want to institute a lockdown, why don't you think about it? Even though we're trying to prevent people from dying from disease, are we also catering to their mental health? Are we catering to their feeding? Are we catering to their current healthcare concerns as well? Because people couldn't go to the hospital in that time. So there were a lot of papers, for example, exploring, you know, those challenges and, you know, cautioning governments and NGOs to say, look beyond just the lockdown. These are the challenges people will face. Please intervene in those areas. So those are care ethics, you know, kind of implementation, care ethics in practice. Now, how do you use these lenses? Each of the lenses introduced helps us determine what standards of behavior and character traits can be considered right and good. Now, there are still problems to be solved, however, right? But the first problem is that we may not agree on the content of some of these specific lenses. We may not all agree on the same set of human and civil rights, which is fine. We may not agree on what constitutes the common good, fine as well, right? We may not agree on what is a good and what is a harm. But what is important is that we act on the basis of a structured pattern of thinking. That's what is important. So, for example, if I ask you a question, right, on the basis of like, for the in-course, don't expect that I do not expect that everybody will have the same answer, right? What I only expect is that beyond our primordial base thinking from our ethical frames, right? What I expect is that we'll adopt some more expansive framework, like this 6 lenses framework, right? Which I'll show you how to apply shortly, right? We'll adopt some framework to think about all, the actions or policy we are formulating. That's what I expect. The second problem is that the different lenses may lead to different answers to question of what is ethical. Each one gives us important insights in the process of deciding what is ethical in a particular circumstance, and that is what is important. Not that we all end up with the same answer. No, what is important is that we have a framework and that we use that. When we use a framework, we reduce our bias in the process. We do more good, and we're seen to be able to be better leaders, better users of resources or better allocators of the resources in our care, right? Now, let's go to how the steps. The first step is identify the ethical issues. Number 1, question that you need to look at. Could this decision or situation be damaging to someone or to some group or unevenly beneficial to people? Does this decision involve a choice between a good and bad alternative, or perhaps between 2 goods or 2 bads? Second question, is this issue more than solely what is legal or what is most efficient? If so, how? The second phase goes with 3 more questions. Get the facts. What are the relevant facts of the case? What is not known? And this is where a talk that Chimamanda Adichie, had several years ago becomes very important. The danger of the single story. What facts are not known? Can I learn more about the situation? Makes you a learning organization, makes you a better leader. Do I know enough to make a decision? What individuals and groups have an important stake in the outcome? Makes you a consulting leader. Are the concerns of some of those individuals or groups more important? Why is it so? What are the options for acting? Have all the relevant persons and groups been consulted? Have I identified creative options? It leads you away from all just consulting to beginning to take actions. Evaluate alternative actions. That's the third phase. And this comes with 1 question or several options, This is where you apply the lens. Evaluate the options by asking this question. Which option best respects the rights of all of those who have a stake? Justice lens. Which option treats people fairly, giving them each what they are due? So you can even develop a table, right? A table of lenses here, and score each of your options based on how you perceive them. You can have it as a group exercise in your office. Either you're trying to evaluate policy positions, or you're trying to evaluate actions that have been taken in, the first half of the year. I believe a number of our offices are beginning to evaluate, actions in the last half of the year. My office has done that. We did an evaluation in the first 2 weeks of July, in the midst of coordinating the exams and all that, but we needed to do that. So we did an evaluation of our actions in the first half of the year. In fact, I should be, I am in the midst of another set of activities for this second half right now, which is why it was a bit difficult fitting, this missed courses into my schedule. But because we had already committed ourselves to taking this course, there was no way we're going to leave you high and dry, right? So it's important as you're evaluating, make it a team effort. You can draw up a table that have the different lenses and the different scores for each of your options, so that you can now sum them up and see which one is the best alternative, all around. No, so you go through all of these, you evaluate all of this, you use a utilitarian lens, you use a common good lens, using these questions, and then after an evaluation using all of these lenses, you now identify which option best addresses the situation. And it is best to do this as a group. It shouldn't be just one person, except if you're a private organization, then do it in consultation with stakeholders, right? And then you are able to, choose the option that best addresses the situation. If I told someone I respect which option I have chosen, what would they say? That's a question you have to ask yourself, right? About the option you're finally choosing. And this is cultural contexting. So you're contextualizing the policy within that community. How can my decision be implemented with the greatest care and attention to the concerns of all stakeholders? And then the last portion is implement your decision and reflect on the outcome. Okay, how did my decision turn out? What have I learned from this specific situation? What follow-up actions should I take? Like I said, most policy adventures are cyclical, so they lead to other policy adventures and other policy adventures and other policy adventures. So don't think you're closing out on one policy adventure, right? You must consistently think about what next? What next? How do we implement this better? How do we go on next? For example, Nigeria's NAFDAC is currently on the journey to become a stringent regulator of medicines in Nigeria. Through their careful, dedicated efforts, they've achieved level 4, and in achieving that level 4, there was no way they would have been able to achieve that level 4 without bringing up their sister agency, right? Which was the Pharmacists Council of Nigeria, which is now the Pharmaceutical Council of Nigeria, right? And the challenge was that the Pharmaceutical Council of Nigeria had a lot of outdated laws which did not fit in frame with what some of the regulations and policies of NAFDAC, right? So they had to work in tandem, work hand in hand until they were able to, get to, a kind of parity level where, we could now say that the WHO regarded medicines regulation in Nigeria as a level 4, which was not yet the level that the NAFDAC is aiming for. But at this point, right, they are saying that medicines coming from Nigeria are good quality and of high standards. Now, the next point is to okay, the exams will be interesting, I can assure you, right? I can assure you the exams will be interesting. I have not given you the assignment because I realized that we had not gone through these 6 lenses. So definitely, immediately after this, I'll give you the assignments so that you begin to see what I meant by everybody. I will appreciate everybody's individuality, with their answers and their process around using the 6 lenses as well. Okay. So, and And thanks for consistently engaging. It actually helps me understand that everyone is, flowing together. Thank you very much. So, it's important that even though they've not reached their goal, but because one person is acting, maybe not, at least to the best of their efforts in that direction, they're acting ethically, they're acting in concert, like they say, a rising tide lifts all boats. So as that is improving, right, sister agencies are also upping their game, and the population will also begin to see, their aim is level 4, which is stringent, right? So they're currently on level 3. Initially, we were at level 1. So in fact, we skipped level 2. I don't think we were on level 2. I think immediately after assessment, when they needed to do assessment, we're still not ready. So I think at that point we're at the point of reviewing some regulations for NAFDAC, reviewing the laws for Pharmaceutical Council of Nigeria. Were at that point. So it was immediately after the approvals were made that they submitted for another course of registration. And from level 1, in fact, they used to joke in NAFDAC that they were at level 0. I think they didn't even agree they were at level 1. But after they upgraded their laboratories, their processes became digital. I know there are teething challenges around all of that, but they're working through it, not reverting back to the old ways of papers with envelopes, right? So everything is now digital. Ethics are upheld, even though there's a backlog, but there's effort to improve it. I also participated in some of the what's it called now? What's that CTD thing? We say CTD, and we'll forget what it means. The technical documents that should be submitted with the registration process, right? I worked with briefly with yes, please go ahead.
Common technical documents.
Thank you. Common technical document. I worked briefly with the WHO PQM group for a while too, when they were setting that up. And so, but you could see NAFDAC's effort at, they weren't waiting, they didn't build up those regulations and just sit in their office and say, come and meet us and learn about it. No, they were actively going to manufacturers. So when, for example, renewals were getting close, they were working with WHO PQM under the United States Pharmacopoeia grant at the time, now under a WHO direct grant to NAFDAC, implemented by what's their name? Implemented by, there's an NGO implementing it though, right? So, all of that is, they're going to the manufacturers and saying, this is what we expect of you. And then they operate workshops where manufacturers are aggregated together in different zones, and then they're helped to understand and know why certain ingredients that they're using in their manufacturing process are not right. That's ethical leadership. That's ethical regulation, right? You do not wait until somebody breaks the law and then you come down on them with a hammer. You go and find out, where are you having problems? These are the ways you can solve those problems, and work with the industries to find creative ways to also surmount challenges. For example, some manufacturers were sourcing active pharmaceutical ingredients or some of their adjuvants, sourcing them from open markets, open chemical markets. Of course, with the intervention of NAFDAC, where you need to enhanced traceability to the manufacturer now. All of that is disappearing. All of that is disappearing. The chemical market that used to be at Ojota is practically disappeared. I'm sure some of our medicines regulators, they know that there's a there's a chemical market in Ojota. Abi, there used to be. But now, because they have to document, right? They have to document, they have to show that this is a manufacturer from whom they obtain this. And that manufacturer also has to show that they are under regulation from the district where they're exporting from. They have to also show that there is a tight supply chain, all of those processes. So they help, that's what ethical regulation is about. That's what ethical leadership is about. You help, you go beyond just making those rules, making those regulations, to supporting your stakeholders to meet up with them. Yes, thank you, Mr. Fasharon. Said there should be care from the regulatory agencies, right? So that's a way it works. I mean, we are a lot of us are aware of the issues around police brutality that has, that has happened very recently in Nigeria, in the US, in several countries around. A lot of times the challenge is ethical leadership. The fact that someone at the top is not modeling that or not insisting that we must be ethical in the implementation of our duties or in the formulation of policies. We're saying, just do it, let it be done. Let's quickly push it forward. Okay, we need to make up the quota of arrest figures. Oh yeah, go and raid. Just go out into town. All those boys at viewing centers, go and arrest them. We just put charge sheets, right? Those are unethical behaviors. We cannot continue like that. There were a few communities during the EndSARS protests. There were communities where we had police. They were known to be collaborators with their communities. So when all that crackdown order was coming from their police offices, the police officers went into their communities. They spoke to the nightclub owners. They spoke to the boys on the streets. They spoke to those that were in maybe shared hostels. They spoke to those that they knew. They spoke to business owners, and there were communities that were calm in spite of the higgy during the whole protest. Right? That is ethical leadership. And you do that by using the 6 lenses, in whatever level you are. Now, let's quickly look at how social justice as well is part of the framework, part of the frame that, decides how we act. Now, social justice refers to promoting fairness, equality, equity, and rights across multiple aspects of society. So this is bringing together all we've learned and actually taking it as a course of action, as a pledge of life, right? So including, like, you want to ensure everybody has equal access to economic opportunities, everyone has equal access to educational opportunities, everyone has equal access to be a worker, to be able to, to be able to apply their energy to generate income for themselves. And the broad concerns across, when we begin to talk about this, is access to economic opportunities, access to education, access to healthcare, access to justice. There are people, lots of people in our jails across Africa that they've not been charged to court, and they've spent a year or more unjustly incarcerated. Some of them for petty crimes that have not been proven. Very, very sickening, right? So there are broad concerns across that. In Nigeria, there's a constant tussle around resource control and power sharing, industry commerce and infrastructure development, recruitment and appointment of public office holders. And all of these are resolvable sorry, all of these are symptoms of failure of ethical leader. They are the failure of leadership, because the kind of leadership that has been provided has either been sectional or regional or or tribal, and nobody has really put a good thought around ethical leadership. No one is thinking that if we provide ethical leadership, it will lift all boats. So a collapse of ethical leadership is what has led to most of these challenges. Now, when we talk about ethical leadership, there's also something we call leadership ethics. It was developed, this framework was developed by Anne Skeet. And basically, it talks about six. Anne Skeet's model talks about six basic, six basic ladders under which we can assess an ethical leader. How does this person, and only one of those refer to the personal character of the person, their character and values, right? Others are around how they take action. How do they create community? Do they encourage ethical conduct? Are they disciplined in their roles within the community? Do they clarify the culture enough for everyone to understand? Do they design ethical systems? And then you have this that helps you. In fact, what I want to enjoin you to do is, this is from the, I'll get the link. It's from an institute. It's from an institute.
Atlantic Life Science. Now, upon medical science.
Hello?
Life Science.
Oh, no, I don't remember.
That like yes.
Maybe Rogers, please mute.
Okay, I thought she had a question for me. Okay, so all of these, right, shows you the mode or the model for an ethical leader. The bedrock of this is rests on character and ethics in that person. That's who the person is. Personal mastery. Someone who would rule the world first must rule himself. It affects their the leader's capacity and their reputation. That's why, sometimes our laws for choosing leaders, talks about the personal character and unimpingible personal character. They must not have been indicted for any crime. They must be upstanding members of the community. All of those, character issues, must not be found around them. Its character is innate. It's a moral quality distinctive to each of us, right? Does one act consistently with your values? Do you acknowledge the irony of leadership, right? So those are around the person of the leader, but much more, you see, and this is where we miss out on ethical leaders as a country. We're always looking, oh, sorry, I'm now beginning to talk like I'm talking to Nigerians. I'm sorry about that. So sometimes we miss out on ethical leaders as a community because we're looking at, oh, this person is very high-handed. He will marshal everybody in one direction. He can command everybody. We're looking at their personal character and we're expanding it beyond their doing, right? Which is supposed to be the emphasis. There are 5 portions. So in essence, we're saying that for every time we look at their character and values, 5 times more, we must look at how well they create communities, how they encourage ethical conduct, how they play their position, how they clarify culture. Do they consistently tell everybody, I am ethical, you must be ethical too, right? Do they clarify culture? Do they design systems? Do they make sure things, do things work only around their personality? Or do things work because they institute, a system, a systematic way of doing things? Right? If we want sustainable cultures, if we want sustainable leadership, sustainable ethical leadership, then we must de-emphasize the person or the strongman picture that we see around African politics and African leaders, and emphasize on their ability to create an enduring community rooted on systems. Okay, so in creating community, must looking at a concept of ongoing contracts between stakeholders. We must be using the mission and vision in decision making, storytelling that we must be able to carry along every member of our communities. The importance of healthy relationships must be emphasized in their communication as well. I realize that we're almost at 12. I will quickly rush through a couple of things, but be sure that I will, whatever I have not clarified here, I will include some notes to clarify them in the final notes I sent to you. Must encourage ethical conduct, right? They must not be passive about how things are done. There must be people who inquire and, design ethical inquiry into the process of things they do. They must be able to represent correct interests in governance, in management, as that's both in public and private institutions. They must be able to represent the correct interests, which is the people in public, and in management, of course, the mission goals and objectives of the institution in social contracts, right? They must clarify the culture, how things are done, even though there's sometimes a gap between what is stated and what is done, but they must constantly be looking at how we can reduce the gap between our say and do ratio, okay? They must constantly be working to ensure that say-do ratio is 1, okay? So we are saying what we are doing and we are doing what we are saying, okay? And then they must be able to design systems that will outlast them. They must be able to design systems that ensure that justice is enthroned. There is all of our 6 lenses are applied in their practice. Now, one example of an adventure in which we find ourselves as Africans is that we have an ethnic makeup, right? We are more aware because we're still rooted to our culture. We're more aware of our ethnic differences. We're more aware of our diversities, than modern societies that are basically lost. Most of their own in corporate societies, most of their in advanced societies, most of their ethics are corporate ethics. They are ethics developed by private institutions for the nation. But here, our identities are still rooted to how we emerged, how we've been relating, since times past. It's still rooted in our cultural identities. And it is something to be proud of and something to consider when we look at our social life together. So what is ethnic balancing and why do we look at ethnic balancing? Let me use Nigeria as an example. And my sincere apologies again, like I said, I'm only using Nigeria because that's the example that I have right on the tips of my fingers. I will still look at other examples. I'll try and include examples from Rwanda. And that's in the final note I sent to you. I'll try and include an example from Rwanda and how ethnic balancing is also being done there. It's under different, they're done under different terms, but the concept is the same. And I'll show you another area where all of these come together. Now, Nigeria has religious pluralism. So we're not just Christians and Muslims in Nigeria. We're not just Christians, Muslims, and traditional worshippers in Nigeria. There are different religions in Nigeria. There are people that are whose religion are not whose religion cannot be considered to be traditional African religions. They are imported, just like we have for Christianity and Islam. They come from other regions as well. For example, we have Buddhists in Nigeria. We have people, atheists in Nigeria. We have, multiple religions. And it's very interesting to say that when we talk about religious pluralism, we also exclude atheists, right? Which is a very interesting concept as well. That in our expansionary thinking, we're still exclusionary, right? We're still excluding those who don't believe there's a God and that religion is any iteration of reality. Now, amongst these, there are the three majorities: Christianity. In fact, in Nigeria currently, Islam is a majority, Christianity is the next, and then we have traditional worshippers. And under traditional worshippers, there are several iterations of this. So it's a grouping of diverse majorities. But I think that after Christianity is Ifa worship in terms of population, but all of them are, grouped under traditional worshippers, right? Now, all of these have differences, diversities, and sometimes those diversities become tensions within communities. For example, it can lead to claims of blasphemy that cannot be proven really in a court. It can lead to claims of religious extremism, can lead to violence, it can lead to loss of lives, can lead to different kinds of reactions. That's just from the religious perspective. Now, there are 374 ethnicities, documented. There are likely more, right? We have 700 and I think 40 something local governments in Nigeria, and many of them identify themselves as distinct from distinct lineages, right? So 374 documented ethnicities with identifiable language differences or sometimes it's not entire language differences. It could be differences in the way intonations are even done with languages, but they identify themselves as different ethnicities, right? And there are three major ones: Hausa, Fulani, Yoruba, Igbo, right? Now, these are the majorities. Remember that these are not all the ethnicities. They're 374. So at least there are 370 more that have not been included in the ones I've mentioned. How do we make our laws and our regulations in such a way that they balance distributive effects, they balance they balance how we distribute resources, they balance how we administer social justice, they balance all of the, there's a balance across all of how we think government should affect the lives of people. Both leaders, we find representation in leadership. How do we balance that? So Nigeria came up with, because of all of this jostling. In fact, I think it was the Constitution Drafting Committee, the first Constitution Drafting Committee that came up with the term federal character. And since then, there have been different definitions of federal character, which is an attempt at ethnic balancing. So the aim of federal character is that we should allow all of our federal institutions to be a representative microcosm of all our ethnic groups. And that by so doing, we can ensure that all voices are heard and all interests are taken care of. Remember that the dream was not that everybody should be employed. The dream is that everybody will be employed so that the voices can be heard, right? And then we came to the point where we do not even know, there's no clarity as to what is the formula being used for representation. Are we representing based on states where we have definite ethnic majorities who will usurp the ethnic minorities in their representation? Are we talking about the basic unit of ethnic configuration, 374 ethnic groups? So what happens when a team is to be only made up of 6 people? How do we ensure 374 people make an input into who should be in that 6-man committee? How do we do it? How do we ensure that we are fair to all while ensuring that public institutions must be efficient working machines? So the discussions around ethnic balancing are ever evolving. They are ever changing. But the fact is that it's a consideration that we must continually look at in order to continually to take diverse opinions and ensure representation. Because representation itself is justice, is social justice. Representation itself is social justice. And we must work in such a way that anybody that has also been injured in the past must also be given a helping hand to, be represented within our institutions. A very good example is, for example, since we're still talking about the Nigerian example, there was a civil war in the past that we have not even walked straight, because those same underlying tensions continue at present, and the reparations that we ought to have taken in steps have not been implemented. It's a failure of ethical leadership as well. So we have those concerns continue to go on year after year. Those same tropes, those same what's it called? Unethical statements, unethical campaigns against, certain regions continue unabated because of the failure of ethical leadership. So we need to continue that. So ethnic balancing is a continued discussion, but it's a practical effort that must be made in order to institute social justice. Because social injustice is not just an irrelevant event. It actually affects people that affects how they are able to practice, that affects what their end result is. It means that some people will have to do twice as much just to be recognized when they are part of the polity and part of the society that they live in. The last one we'll quickly discuss as we'll round up because of time, and then we'll quickly allow some questions, is the aspect of discrimination. And discrimination we'll look at in twofold, right? Okay, let me quickly go through some of the definitions. The UN in the Discrimination Convention article states that any distinction, exclusion, or preference made on the basis of race, color, sex, religion, political opinion, or even social origin that has the effect of nullifying or impairing equality of opportunity or treatment in employment or occupation is discrimination. Such other distinctions, exclusion, or preference that has the effect of nullifying or impairing equality of opportunity or treatment in employment or occupation, as may be determined by the member, that's the member state, concerned after consultation with representative employers and workers' organizations where such exist, and with other appropriate bodies. Okay, so there is direct and indirect discrimination. Let's use a more clearly worded one from the European Union that says that direct discrimination occurs when a person is treated less favorably than another in a comparable situation because of their racial or ethnic origin, religion or belief, disability, age, or sexual orientation. The second is indirect discrimination, and this is where the law can be corrupt. Indirect discrimination occurs when an apparently neutral provision, criterion, or practice would disadvantage people on the grounds of racial or ethnic origin, religion, belief, disability, age, or sexual orientation, unless the practice can be objectively justified by a legitimate aim. Recently, there was claim that a bank was preventing people from going to pray, even though it was debunked, right? But that kind of, for example, not giving people time to go and pray, for example, not allowing Muslims to go and pray on Fridays, giving them that time from 1 p.m. to, I think it's 3 p.m., as if they're right. And it is the organization that should find a way to make up for that time, either by ensuring appropriate mix of human resources, right? By not allowing that, you discriminate. What you're saying is Muslims are not allowed to come here. So even though you have set in a law that all work hours must be covered by the person on duty, at that time, when this person who is on duty is supposed to go and pray, what social justice allows for is that you should have someone else, right, within the same work environment that has been scheduled to come in and cover for them. If it's a locum professional to come in and cover that time, it should be done in a way that is equitable to the person that needs to go to pray. In all of these, the idea is that we must be more vigilant. We must be more attentive to actions than just take them, without considering the consequences. Let me quickly we'll come back to this case study. Treatment, which results from social justice, is a result of social justice, and it is there are two sides. There's ethical and non-ethical preferential treatment. Non-ethical preferential treatment comes from personal biases. For example, a director in the organization decides to recruit their in-law and their relatives as their PA, as their SAs, as their personal assistant, special assistant, technical assistant, whether or not, even if they have the technical skill, right? They just appoint them, and then some of them, when they're about to leave the office, they go to establishment and say, slot in the name of this person. He's been very hardworking in the organization. In fact, put them as assistant directors and let them head this division inside the either ministry or department or agency, right? Those are unethical behaviors. They are preferential treatment, but they are unethical. Sometimes too, justice is made unethical when, for example, a politician who steals $1 million is allowed to refund 10 million naira, right? And is told, is maybe given an indictment for 2 years, which he can commute, right, by doing social service. And then somebody caught on the streets for stealing 10,000 naira is sent to jail for 5 years, right? Those are unethical preferential treatments. But there is another preferential treatment that happens that are termed ethical. For example, affirmative action or positive action has a number of different definitions, which all usually point towards the same end. Preferential policies. These are preferential policies that tend to either repair the damage that has been done to an ethnic group or to a particular set of people, right, because of something that happened in the past. So preferential policies generally refer to those actions taken with the purpose of helping and supporting certain groups, even though other groups might be treated less advantageously. But those other groups also are part of the conversation and know why that is being done, okay? Common argument used to justify this action is often that preferential policies would promote ethnic and cultural diversity. So the reason why we're doing that is because we want to ensure that we continue to be fair to all and to retain our cultural diversity as it appears now, right? So examples are affirmative action. Federal character in employment is also preferential treatment, but it's ethical preferential treatment. For example, we also have this practice of admission to universities called there's a name we call it catchment areas. Catchment areas where for a certain state, like Lagos State, for example, in Nigeria, all of the Southwest states are admitted only if they've passed the cutoff mark to enter a certain degree or course. But somebody from a less educationally advantaged or developed area, maybe from the Northeast and the Northwest, right, of the Northeast, Northwest, and North Central of the country, can apply to the same course, having scored within a band of about 20% less than the cutoff mark, and still be given admission because they are considered educationally less developed. So that's a kind of that principle of catchment area is also an allowance given to help educationally disadvantaged areas to get the manpower and the skills they require so they can also go back and transform their own communities, right? So these are preferential treatments that come from ethical considerations that we need to give a hand to others that are less developed to us, okay? So that's important. Now, let's quickly take our case study, and then we'll take questions and answer for about 10 minutes. So the Ministry of Health has designed a drug distribution guideline and made for tiers of actors, including manufacturers, stroke importers as entry points for, those are the entry points or ingress for materials, finished products, or for either materials, starting products, semi-finished products, or finished products, right? Manufacturers and importers. And then once finished products leave that point, it goes to mega drug distributors, right? From mega drug distributors to wholesalers. And then from wholesalers, it goes to retailers. So retailers include community pharmacies and hospitals, and of course, NGOs and others, right? Now, in the process, the requirements for professional distribution has been outlined by the regulator. When implementing, you now discover that 84% of wholesalers were unregistered off-takers from local manufacturing companies. And they have a holding of close to 35% of the $1 billion pharmaceutical drug stock manufactured in the country. Most were smallholder firms who could not meet up with the regulatory requirements as they've been established. If the smallholder off-takers are pushed out of the market, it will affect the local manufacturers' capacity to continue operating. Reason being because over the years, those local manufacturers have built capacity for their own distribution in the absence of strong distribution off-takers. So most of the distributors that were in existence serviced exclusively importers of branded products, and even some generics from China, India, Pakistan, Malaysia, and other East African countries, Middle East countries, right? No, now, so these off-takers were essentially built by local drug manufacturers, and it's still part of their own equity. So they own equity in those off-takers, unregistered off-takers. Now, if they are pushed out of the market, it will be equity write-off for the local manufacturers, which will push the country into medicine insecurity. Now, another aspect to this, most of these off-taker wholesalers are also part of a particular tribe considered to have been marginalized and discriminated against in prior years. My first question is, what would you do as a middle manager of this medicines regulatory agency in charge of implementation of this guideline? That's one. What if you were a non-government actor? How would you decide on your course of action? I want you to think about this question and come with a few suggestions on Friday when we'll meet next. I want you to think about the questions. There are two questions here. One is, you're a middle manager, you're not, but you're in charge of implementation. So most likely you're in enforcement. And then what if you were a non-government actor? How would you aim to act to implement social justice in this position? Thank you very much, there all. I appreciate your attention and your time. I do not take it lightly that you've taken out of your own schedules to meet with me today. I recall that we still have one more engagement on Friday. And so we'll just do general discussions on Friday. I will include a few more notes on this on social justice. I'll include on corruption and send a note to you. So any questions before we close off this session? Any questions? Please go ahead if you have a question or clarification about maybe the next session we're supposed to have together.
Thank you very much for the lecture, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Fasharon.
Yes, you talked about the notes at the beginning, the assignments at the beginning of the class. Are we using this one you gave us as the assignment, or we should be expecting another?
Okay, use this one as an assignment, but I'll still give you more assignments.
Okay, when should we be expecting the assignment, sir?
You should expect more assignments by Friday when we meet, but I should be able to send it earlier. I have been tremendously pulled in different directions. I was apologizing to you at the beginning of this class because sincerely yours, I do not expect that would have this much challenges. So when I committed and said that I was going to take the remaining part of the course, I didn't realize that, I haven't committed to something else as well, and then trying to meet up with the ensuring I give you quality discussions and frameworks as well. It wasn't going to be an easy journey, but I assure you that you will get more assignments by Friday. But this one is the one I need you to look at before Friday.
Okay, sir.
It seems pretty straightforward, but maybe do you have opportunities where the class comes together to discuss?
Not really.
Why? You're missing out of the most important component of this course. In fact, you're missing out of the entire component of this. Okay, so let's make Friday will be your first discussion session. We'll make Friday a brilliant discussion session. So please, everybody, as much as you can on Friday, we're going to have an open session. So everybody will have to put on their cameras. So please, on Friday, ensure you're in a comfortable area where you can put on your camera. And we're going to have discussions on Friday. The best component for postgraduate studies is a community you form, not really the content of the course. So I feel that you're missing out so much on that. So
Somebody just asked a question, sir.
Sorry?
Somebody just asked a question in the chat box.
Okay. Is it possible that in trying to act ethically, your decision may still leave some people dissatisfied? Yes, that's correct. It is possible. Remember that we said that even after using all of the 6 lenses, you will arrive at, you are only going to choose the action that has the most benefit to everybody. So it means that some people will be left out. Let me give you a practical example. I will not open up I have a document on my computer, right? We have just defended our results last week, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, we defended results, right? And we found out that, so the university gives us some latitude in how we compute exam results. So That's for undergraduate. I'm talking about undergraduate exams now. I'm trying to use that to illustrate this point. I'm talking about undergraduate exams. Now, for that, the university allows us to use either 40% for in-courses, that's in-session course exams, or use 30%. So you're free to use anything from the bandwidth of 30 to 40%. You can use 31, you can use 32, you can use 33, 34, 35, but of course, most people just use either 30 or 40. They also allow us to use for the exam between 60 and 70, right? So anything that makes up 100% after you've weighted the two different exams. Now, there was a particular course that all of my 128 students, yeah, we have classes with up to 100 plus students, right? 128 students, of them, 127 passed and only one student failed. Don't worry, I'm going to send the slides immediately after this class. You didn't get the assignment. I'm going to send it immediately after this class. The additional text I said I want to give, I'll give it later, but I'll send this slide as it is immediately after this class. Thank you. So, I was giving an example. Okay, yes. So 127 students passed, one failed, using the computation of 30-70, right? 30% to in-course exams and 70% to final course exams. Now, I prepared a number of scenarios, but what appeared useful was 30-70 and 40-60. With the second scenario, with the 40-60 scenario, 2 students failed, but they failed in such a way that their results could not be moderated, right? So in the first scenario, 1 person fails. In the second scenario, 2 people failed and cannot be moderated as well. Now, we decided to go with the one that had the least number of failures, because even though we're making a decision based on numbers, those numbers affect the lives of human beings. So we need to moderate the effects that those actions will have to the least possible harm. And the least possible was 1. So only 1 person ended up failing. I hope you understand. So using 30-70, we're able to maximize the number of people that would pass rather than just going ahead and using an arbitrary 40-60. I hope you understand that. So 1 person is still dissatisfied, but we have more people satisfied than dissatisfied.
Yes.
So the aim is to maximize benefits to all. That's our ethical dilemma between all those options we have. Which of them caters to the largest diverse population of stakeholders in our community? Any other questions or comments? Okay, I want to say thank you to everyone. I appreciate your time. I hope we meet again on Friday as God keeps us. So we'll have a good discussion together.
Hello, sir.
Yes, please go ahead.
Hello, sir.
Yes, please go ahead.
Yes, sir. I'm Winston from Liberia. I'm actually from Yeah, I'm always thrown out by the internet and by the
Oh,
network.
I'm sorry.
And so I found it difficult to hear you. All of the talks are just somehow disjointed. So I would appreciate, sir, if you help me with the recording, please.
Okay. I'll send the recording. Usually it takes about 30 minutes or so after the class ends. But as soon as the recording is available, I'll share the link with the class rep so that, or I'll send it via email so everyone can have access to it. Thanks, everyone.
Sir, also the tutorial question, sir.
Questions?
Hello, sir.
Yes. The one I said I'll send by Friday.
Oh, okay. All right, sir.
Yeah, I already promised I'll send it in. So no problem, no problems. I'll send it in. So please, as much as you can, discuss this question on the group page, and then we'll come together on Friday morning, 10 a.m., right? We'll be able to still discuss it as a group, and then it won't take so much time as well. Thank you very much. Have a good day, everyone. Bye.